no one has the right to determine the capabilities of another human being. And this is a failing of so many of us. None of us can look at another and say, oh, I know what you're capable of. And this is the problem for so many people, because they forget that words have power. And, if somebody tells you who you respect that you'll never amount to anything, this is the worst thing somebody can do to another.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Dr. James Doty with us. James is an adjunct professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University School of Medicine, and he's the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, of which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor. James is also the author of the book Into the Magic Shop, A Neurosurgeon's Quest to Discover the Mysteries of the Brain and the Secrets of the Heart, a New York Times bestseller, which has now been translated into 40 languages and editions. I'm holding it in my hand right now. I'm about 3/4 of the way through this book, and I just love it. And James is also about to come out with a new book called Mind Magic, The Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. James also has been on the board of a number of nonprofits. He's the former chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, former vice chair of the Charter for Compassion. His work has been cited in numerous media, including the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, ABC, and many others. James, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Stephan. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
I said this already, but I love the book Into the Magic Shop. I don't read that many books through to completion, and this one I'm almost finished with. So that really says something. And I've been reading it to my wife, Orion. They're very, very rarely do I read books to my wife, but you're one of the handful that I've ever read to her.
Well, I have to say, I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes and his pastiches that come out in various forms, and I read them to my wife at night, but it puts her to sleep. That's why. So hopefully that's not what you're using it for. But
no,
if you are, that's okay too.
No, she loves it. And speaking of things to do to with your spouse or partner, there's this concept I got from one of my other guests a while ago, Harville Hendricks. He wrote Getting the Love You Want and is the creator of Imago Couples Therapy. And he does this thing at night with his wife. It's called the 3 appreciations, or the daily appreciations. He comes up with, tries to come up with new ones every single night, but 3 things that he appreciates about his wife, and then she does the same with him, and they haven't missed a single day in, I don't know, a couple decades.
Wow. That says something about discipline, and I would say most of us are not quite that disciplined.
Or also about what you care about, right?
Yes, I do try to acknowledge my wife at least once a day.
Awesome. So how did you end up coming to write Into the Magic Shop? Because that's quite a departure for somebody who's a neurosurgeon and inventor, entrepreneur, philanthropist. You've got a lot of things going on, and writing a book is not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not. And in fact, that took about 2.5 years, and it is very difficult. It's difficult to sort of organize your thoughts. And I mean, frankly, there has to be an arc of a story, right? And because I think probably everyone has an extraordinarily interesting life, but it's like everything. It's, how do you present it? And but getting back to your question, why did I write this book? There were several reasons. One was based on my background, which you know from the book, was one of growing up in poverty with an alcoholic father, a disabled, chronically depressed mother who attempted suicide, being evicted. And of course, that's not the typical environment for someone to succeed in life. And unfortunately, like many people who have that type of background, ultimately, I thought the acquisition of stuff or chasing money, power, position would fill the emptiness inside. And the strange thing for me was that what put me on a different path was meeting a woman in a magic shop. It turned out she was the owner's mother and didn't know anything about magic, but she knew about people. And her and I immediately connected because she had this embracing, radiant smile. And she was non judgmental. She treated me not as a 12-year-old, but as a fellow human being. And we conversed for 20 or 30 minutes after I'd walked into the shop. And she basically said to me, you know, I think I could really help you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. If you show up every day, that would be great. And frankly, I knew nothing about what she was talking about. And the other reality, though, was that I had absolutely nothing else to do. So I did show up. And she had enough awareness to understand, one, that I was suffering, two, that I had been traumatized by the chaotic environment that I was growing up in, which makes it hard to concentrate and focus. So she took the time to teach me what we would call a typical mindfulness practice. And this was in the late 60s. So this was fairly unusual to run across people who had this expertise. But she also combined it in a little bit different way in the context of having me understand that I had to have self-compassion. So many of us are hypercritical of ourselves, and these are, on some ways, evolutionarily related, but oftentimes it goes overboard and it limits us. And I was in that position. And so she taught me how to be kind to myself or be self-affirming. But she also made me realize that when you look through the lens of criticality towards yourself, this is translated to how you look at other people. So then she taught me how to understand the nature of suffering, and it affects everyone. And it's not just me, and it's not just about me. And that changed, how I looked at the world. I was much less suspicious. I was more thoughtful. I was more kind. And in fact, I no longer carried hostility towards my parents, who I, felt had failed me. But it made me realize that they had their own struggles, and they did not have the tools to help them. So it had a profound effect. And the last thing she taught me was actually a manifestation exercise, or how to manifest your intentions. But unfortunately, as a 12-year-old, I didn't have the insight, self-awareness, or wisdom to properly understand or use that information. In fact, I made a list of, I think, 10 things that I wanted. And, one was to be a millionaire. One was to live in a mansion. I think one was to own an island. One was to have a Rolex watch. And on some level, I missed the point. And I did accomplish all of those things. But at the end of it all, or after having climbed every one of these mountains, I kept thinking that suddenly my insecurity, my shame would go away. And it never did. And it made me ultimately realize that it is within our power, and in fact, it is only within our power, that we can grant ourselves happiness and acceptance. And so once I understood that, it changed my outlook from one of sort of chasing the external markers of success in Western or capitalistic society, to actually looking through a different lens of being of service, how to help others. Because when you are in that mode, actually, it results in your physiology actually improving, because our evolution is such that we are, in some ways, hardwired to care for others. And this is in the context of our offspring who don't swim away or run off into the forest after they're born. They need us to take care of them. And when we care for them, we're rewarded by stimulation of our reward and pleasure centers. And this is through, of course, oxytocin and other neurotransmitters.
So I want to put forth a wild assertion that you picked your parents.
Okay.
Has that ever occurred to you? That possibility that you may have picked your parents before you incarnated?
Fundamental to that query is, do I believe in reincarnation? Which I don't. That being said, of course, I've had a long-term relationship with the Dalai Lama, who, of course, does. And in fact, many of the spiritual leaders and gurus that I know do. I'm sure you're aware of the literature where there are some children early in age who recount past lives.
Yep, I've had Dr. Jim Tucker on the show to talk about that. Yeah.
Sure. Is anything possible? Perhaps. Was there some karmic reason that I was being punished to grow up in my background, or was the nature of that growing up teaching me lessons to help me in this life and to decrease the endless cycle of reincarnation? Sure, anything's possible, but you could say, I believe in Zeus, fertility from trees and snakes. First of all, we don't know, but second of all, my scientific mind resists going there. That being said, I know so many interesting individuals in the world who have a variety of different belief systems, and my view is, whatever it is you choose to believe, if it allows you to be your best self, it's all irrelevant if it does no harm to other people. So I'm all for any belief system. For me, though, I have no attachment to any of them because I don't think it's necessary to have a moral, ethical framework of how you lead your life to believe in any of these things. I think that from my own perspective, by being of service, by helping others, it not only improves my physiology, but improves my mental state. So I'm perfectly happy. And if at the end of the day, there's nothing there, that's okay. I'm not attached to, an afterlife or a reincarnation. I'm just trying to do the best I can in the circumstances that my illusionary self has created for me in this world. The reason I say this, I was in a conversation with Deepak Chopra the other day about the illusion of self, and which of course can take you down a variety of different rabbit holes. But
so what did you take out of that conversation with Deepak?
Well, I've had these types of conversations also with Sam Harris and David Eagleman and a lot of different other people. So it's interesting because you commented about how people may have these past lives which stay with them after they're born instead of being completely erased. And, who we become as people is a collection of our experiences. And in some ways, if you leave out the spiritual reincarnated being floating on the outside, waiting to attach itself to you, we're a blank slate. And so whether you're born in the West or in the East, whatever that environment is becomes your reality and yourself. And so it is certainly not hardwired. There is nothing there. So when we get deluded into believing there is a concrete self, we have to accept the fact that we have created it to allow us to live in this world, but it has no meaning. There's nothing there. As an example, if you try psychedelics, for some people, that causes a significant reset. And what I mean by that is who we are as people, our drivers, our interactions, our behaviors, are manifestation of the baggage that we have picked up growing up. And unfortunately, for a number of people, they interfere with us being sort of our best selves or our ideal selves, and they limit us. And many people then fall into addiction or other maladaptive behaviors, and they keep repeating them, whether it's picking a partner, whether it's choosing, which path to take when you're given choices. And so when people take psychedelics, for a subset of those people, it either resets them or starts them at zero or erases it or whatever it is that is limiting them. And then they can see the world through a different lens and in some ways start over. And I've seen this in numerous instances where people's lives have been changed. So not to get too long-winded in that explanation, but I do believe that there are many paths you can take, and we are deluded to think that who we are within this world is actually who we really are.
Have you had any kind of glitches in the matrix or glimpses into parallel realities, parallel universes, or timelines, or anything like that? Anything that makes you think like this reality isn't all it's kind of cracked up to be, or there's something more behind the scenes?
As an example, I used to do something called astral projection when I was younger. And I would go to different levels or states, and there were beings there that sort of were not as normally we think of as beings, and interacted with them. Was that real or was it a dream? I don't know. I have no proof of either. It certainly, in a few instances, was incredibly frightening because, unfortunately, I was doing some very deep spiritual or meditative practices that without a guide. And I would suggest you that's not the wisest choice to make. But also, as I mentioned in my book, my father was quite ill, and in fact, he was going to die, and I was supposed to travel out to see him, and because he was across the country in a hospital, and I was suddenly awoken and by an image of my father, actually, and it was quite profound because suddenly he was there. And so I woke up and my father is at the end of the bed. And he was an alcoholic and obviously and a smoker, and had the stigmata of that in terms of how he appeared. And he appeared, though, at the end of the bed like very healthy, happy. And he greeted me and basically was there to say goodbye, but also, to apologize and to say everything was okay. So obviously it moved me very much now, and still does. But the question is, was that a dream or was it real? I mean, all of us have had experiences where we have thought something was real and in fact was not. I don't know. All I can do is process the event, looking for the source of it. Oftentimes we're not happy or we'll never know. I accept it for what it was. It meant a lot to me. So there it is. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question at all, but certainly I think all of us have had a variety of experiences that seem to be, if you will, far beyond what our reality is, how we define our reality. But again, the challenge is, where does it stop? As an example, I mean, you have a subset of people who believe in the healing power of crystals. And it goes to far extremes. And what I would say for all of the people who head out in that direction, again, we have so much power within ourselves that our belief actually is the driver. It's not necessarily the crystal or any of the other things that people carry around or choose to say, this is where my strength, or this is where my guidance, or this is where my healing comes from. It all comes from your brain. So, carrying a Bible around and saying Jesus cured me, or carrying crystals around and saying that cured me, what you're really saying is you cured yourself. It's just, unfortunately, you transferred your own agency and power to something outside of yourself.
So where'd you best get the sense of your own agency and power? Like, what was the moment in your life or the experience that really gave you a glimpse of who you truly are?
Well, certainly interacting with Ruth in the magic shop gave me a different view of the world because, like many people, we look outside ourselves as the cause of our reality or our problems. And we go through this exercise. Well, if only they hadn't done this, or if only I was offered this job, or if only I didn't have these parents, et cetera, et cetera. And we believe that then that is the power that's exerted over us that limits our availability or ability to do X, Y, or Z. And in some ways, it's how we process events. An event in and of itself has no valence. It is neither good nor is it bad. It is us who attach an emotion to an event. And then that gets processed and gets embedded and becomes part of, quote unquote, ourself. And it is something that for most of us, we do not have insight or self-awareness that we're actually doing that. And the same is true of attaching power to a variety of other things, of which people give up their agency. Jesus is going to save me, or if I put this crystal around my neck, it's going to direct the energy away from me, or towards me. And in fact, I had a patient in his 20s who came in to see me, who you could put in the category of a bohemian or hippie type. And he came in with multiple brain metastases. And his explanation was he didn't realize that the quartz crystal he was wearing was directed out and not in, and he had let this bad energy enter him, and that was the reason he had these brain tumors.
That quote from Henry Ford: "If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." I think there's some sort of analogy here that some corollary to that quote that applies here. If you think you're sick or you think you're not, you're right, or something like that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's exactly correct. I mean, as an example, if you say I can't, by definition, it's not possible, period. And I try to always say anything is possible. And now, obviously, if I would say, well, I want to become an astronaut today, that is highly, highly, highly unlikely. But I still believe that each of us has an immense amount of power. The challenge comes in for many people to, understand that while the self is an illusion, we do have physical bodies and there are constraints. And as an example, when people, let's say, are diagnosed with cancer and they say, well, I'm going to forgo normal treatments or traditional medical treatments, and I'm going to go on a strictly vegan diet and then have my crystal surrounding me every night. Well, the reality is, at least in 99.9% of cases, it's probably not going to work. So there has to be some tempering with an understanding of the limitations of our physical bodies and interacting with the environment, specifically in that regard. But that is different than the power that we have if you want to call it, in our mind or our consciousness. And I think those are two different things.
So the mind and the consciousness are two different things?
No, no, no. The mind and the body are two different things.
Mind and the body. So do you believe that everything has consciousness?
Yes. Or you can use the term consciousness, but certainly everything has a vibrational energy, whether it's a rock or whether it's you. And there's an immense amount of literature that demonstrates that oftentimes with what we would call living beings, they will modulate that vibrational energy in a manner in which it aligns with others around them. And while, you could sit there and argue this is woo woo, the fact of the matter is there's a significant amount of scientific evidence that demonstrates that reality.
So what would be an example of something that really made you more connected to the unseen world, and like something that maybe gave you a sign of a bigger picture, right? So you shared your experience with seeing your dad, uh, and that was incredible. I feel that that was 100% real. Have you had, for example, other communications with him since he's passed, like any kind of without a doubt signs, like, okay, this, there's no chance that this could have happened by accident, anything like that?
Well, I didn't complete the story. He appeared to me at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I got a call from his doctor that he had passed a few hours later. I did have a near-death experience. I was out with some colleagues when I was early in my neurosurgery residency. We had been drinking and ran into a tree. Long story short, I have had multiple significant injuries. I was operated on. They missed a bleeder in my abdomen. My blood pressure dropped. I left my body. And soon thereafter, I had the classic near death experience of going down a river of light towards sort of this light at the end of the tunnel, if you will, that was embracing me. And I had different individuals who I cared or loved welcoming me. And so many people sit there and say, well, clearly that was the thing that, made you who you are. And unfortunately, it did not. To me, it was simply a physiologic manifestation of hypoxia affecting your visual cortex, which there's a fair amount of literature written on that. So it had no impact. So trying to answer your question, how did I change? I'm not sure if I ever really changed. I've always had an openness to possibilities. And it's interesting because people ask me frequently, they say, well, you're not a Buddhist yet, the Dalai Lama's embraced you. You're not Hindu yet, Amma's embraced you. And Sri Sri Ravi Shankar has embraced you, and Sadhguru, and the Pope, and Desmond Tutu. How is it possible when you're, quote unquote, a non believer, yet you seem to have this ability to connect with these individuals without knowing anything? I shouldn't say anything, because I do know a fair amount about these various practices, but you're not a follower. What I say is these types of individuals live above their dogma. And what I mean by that is the dogma is very useful for a large segment of their followers. It gives them guidance, it gives them morals and ethics, it gives them practices that elevate them. But all of these individuals live above these practices. They know that love, kindness, compassion, connection are really the most important thing. And there is no religion attached to that. There's no separation. They understand that we are all one. And therefore, when they see someone, and I will assure you that these individuals can immediately intuit if you sort of are in the same place or on the same page as them, then they accept you. that's been my experience. And I don't try to change anybody either. I accept everyone and accept them at face value. And in some ways, this is one of the most important things is, are you able to accept someone and be non-judgmental, recognize their dignity, embrace them as a human being without judgment, and understand that everyone's suffering, everyone's made mistakes, everyone's an imperfect, impermanent, incomplete being, and simply have love for them.
There's a quote goes something like this. I'm going to munge it up here, but religion is like the menu, and the spiritual truth of who we are and how the universe works and God and everything is the meal. You can't replace the meal with the menu, but the menu is a good descriptor to help kind of prepare you or get you to the meal. But it's treated if it's treated like a replacement, then people go really off track. Then, so that's a nowhere near what the quote was, but that's the best I can come up with.
I think I understand, but in some ways, taking that analogy a little bit further, unfortunately, there's also baggage that makes us want to feel safe, and for many people, that gets translated into choosing a tribe. And depending on what the norms are or the beliefs of that tribe, then many people actually embrace the edicts or embrace the philosophy, or if you want to call it religion, and then no longer question anything. And certainly, this idea that the menu contains many, if you will, religions or practices, I think that's true. And in fact, you could argue that religion is a manifestation of two things. One is the reality that beyond about 150 people, we cannot keep track of another. And what I mean by that is if it's less than that, and that, I think it's called Dunbarton's number, we know almost everybody. And if they deviate from the social norm or the tribe demands, then you're going to know who they are. Once you get off beyond that number, then people will go off and do things that are selfish or self-serving. And so by creating a narrative that says there's this omniscient being that sees all, and if you continue to fall into the practices of your tribe or religion, you'll get everlasting life. And of course, humans are the only species that have a perception of their finite existence. So when you offer the subset of people everlasting life, if they're good people, quote unquote, this is enticing as a motivator to do, quote unquote, the right thing. So I think that is really the source of most religions, if not all. And of course, this idea of being around others makes you feel safe, but it also results in you having inherent biases, which then put you at conflict with a lot of other people. Because again, unfortunately, humans have a tendency to want to be in a group that is quote unquote right. And that means then that there are other people who are wrong, and that creates conflict. And the reality is there's no one who's wrong in that context. We're all seeking truth, and this idea that there's this ultimate oneness, or that we're all connected in some way. We're all matter, we're all atoms, etc. That, at the end of the day, is the truth, I believe.
There's this image I saw on social media somewhere. I'll have to find it and include it in the show notes. It's a three-dimensional cylinder casting a shadow on a plane in on one side, so that forms a rectangle. The shadow creates a rectangle, and that is labeled with the word true. So rectangle, true. And then perpendicular to that on another two-dimensional plane is a projection, a shadow cast from that cylinder, and it's a circle. And that is labeled with circle, and that's labeled as true. But the cylinder itself is three-dimensional, and that's labeled with truth. So we could argue like, hey, that's a cylinder, and well, that we can't see the cylinder. That's too high dimensional for us. So we're just seeing the projection. Like in Plato's cave, we're just seeing like, oh, that's definitely a circle. No, it's definitely a rectangle. But we're both right. But we're also only seeing a piece of the truth.
Well, again, this is like, yeah, I mean, this is, yes, I've heard that, but this is analogous to, it's dark and you have three or four people and they're each exposed to a part of an elephant, right? And, one feels the tail and one feels the trunk and one feels the ears and one feels the foot. And they all describe completely different things, yet they're all talking about the same thing. They just don't have the complete picture. And I think that this is why we need to have sort of metacognition, meaning we need to get outside of our prejudices and views and limitations and understand that there's a lot of stuff we don't see, and accept that as reality. And this comes down to, in some ways, this illusion of self. The self we have created is neither logical nor perfect, and is not immutable either. Yet this is the thing we live in, and we think that that is it, and it's not. So just having the understanding of that hopefully limits you from becoming judgmental, of others. I mean, it's and who gave us the right to also define truth? But so many people feel absolutely certain they're right, and the interesting paradox of that is that if you have this certainty of being right, it actually increases your longevity because you no longer have the stresses of the possibility of uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, in Kabbalah, they teach that certainty is not of this world, that it's in the upper worlds, and you can be gifted some certainty, like by praying for it, for example, but that it's not part of this reality. So by its design, this is an uncertain world, and praying for certainty beyond logic is a way to navigate that with some sense of certainty. If do you know anything about Kabbalah?
A little bit. But again, this is very similar to most religious practices. So there are two problems. One is most people actually do not absolutely follow the tenets of their religion. And because they're ambiguous, confusing, and oftentimes not straightforward.
Or contradicting.
Or contradicting. So because it's an amalgamation of what a lot of people have written, and the very nature of that results in uncertainty. So what people do is they create a narrative that works for them. And it's not really following the tenets of the absolute tenets of their religious practice. It is something so that it gives them moral, ethical guidelines and comfort in terms of living in this world. And it can be distorted. Most people are moderates, and they define it as a mechanism to live in their reality. But there's a subset of extremists who have the perception of it's us versus them, and I'm right and you're wrong. And of course, this leads to horrible behaviors that, by any measure, you would not follow if you were of that particular religious practice. As an example, the words of Jesus have been distorted by, far right, white evangelical nationalists to create a narrative that allows them to look in the mirror and say they're right while they're spewing hatred towards other people.
Yeah. By the way, I found that quote about the menu and the meal. It's actually, yeah, it's really good. Okay, it's aren't all religions equally true? No, all religions are equally false. The relationship of religion to truth is like that of a menu to a meal. The menu describes the meal as best it can. It points to something beyond itself. As long as we use the menu as a guide, we do it honor. When we mistake the menu for the meal, we do it and ourselves a grave injustice. That's from Rabbi Rami Shapiro.
And those are wise words.
So let's shift over to manifesting. And I loved the story into the Magic Shop book where you recounted how you ended up getting into university. It was just against all odds. The only thing I can think of to describe it is it was a divine setup. So if you could regale our listener with what happened, because they probably didn't read your book, and then add whatever additional commentary, I think that'd be lovely.
So you're talking about university or medical school?
I think it was university where you didn't even have an application form.
As I had mentioned earlier, I grew up in poverty. I didn't have mentors. My parents had not gone to college. I had decided to become a doctor because in my fourth grade class, they had a professions day and a pediatrician came, and I was inspired by him, his compassion, his kindness, and the fact that when I asked him a question, he was very kind and thoughtful. And so at that moment, I decided to be a doctor. But, wanting to be a doctor and becoming a doctor are two very different things. And the way I ended up applying to college in some ways epitomizes the reality that I knew nothing. And I didn't. The way I ended up applying was I was sitting next to a girl in my science class. And she, and this was in the days before we had computers, she was, filling out her application. And I looked over and I asked her what she was doing. And she looked up at me and she said, well, I'm applying to college. This is my application. And literally, this was the first realization that I had that it was time to apply to college. And I said, oh, really? I said, yeah, I haven't gotten my application. And where are you going to college? And she said, well, I'm going to UC Irvine. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. She goes, well, where are you going? I said, and I actually had never thought about it, but I looked at her and I said, I'm going to UC Irvine. She said, oh, well, I have an extra application if you haven't received yours. And I said, that's fantastic. And I rushed and I got it done. And I applied to one college, which was UC Irvine. And that was the college I was accepted into. Now, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that, again, being accepted to college and finishing college are two different things. I had to leave multiple times to deal with family issues, as an example, to get my father out of jail, to deal with my mother who had attempted suicide, or help deal with the fact that we were evicted. So I kept leaving college. I kept dropping out of classes. And when it came time to apply to medical school, my grade point average was 2.53. And at that time, the average grade point average for acceptance to medical school was 3.79. Irvine, there was a requirement that you had to get a letter from the pre-med committee if you were going to apply to medical school. so what happened was I went to make an appointment, and the secretary informed me that she would not give me an appointment. And she looked at me and she said, no. And I said, why? And she said, because it's a waste of everyone's time. Now, can you imagine, as a human being, telling another human being that they're a waste of your time? And fortunately, I don't know if it was maturity or belief in myself, but I looked at it and I said, I'm not leaving until you give me that appointment. If you want to call security, fine, but I'm not leaving. So she did give me an appointment. And then I showed up for my appointment. And imagine what it's like when you're 20 or 21 years old and you go into a room, and some of you have seen the photographs of Putin when he was at this long table and he's at one end and there are these people at the other end, and he's pontificating to them. So in my instance, there were three people at one end of the table and I was at the other, this long table, and the person in the middle, who was the chairman of the committee, had my file in his hand, and he stood up and he took it and he threw it on the desk or the table, and he said, okay, say what you want to say so we can get this over with. And again, this attempt at intimidation by somebody in power, it's horrible. Fortunately, I was able to look at him and I said, I'm not going to allow you to objectify me on the basis of my grade point average. You know nothing about me as a human being. And then I proceeded to lecture them for about 20 or 30 minutes about the reality that nobody had the ability to judge one's capabilities, and that there's no evidence whatsoever that beyond a above average level of intelligence, it has anything to do with your success as a physician. And once I forced them not to objectify me, they had to look at me. So at the end of this, they were all cried. And so then as I was leaving, that secretary handed me a mimeograph sheet. And for many of your listeners, I'm sure they have no idea what a mimeograph sheet is. But before there were copiers, you would print things with a mimeograph. But this brochure she gave me described a program at Tulane University School of Medicine for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and for minority students. And she looked at me and she said, well, the deadline for application is closed, but I don't think this will matter for you. So I ended up calling the woman who ran the program, and she actually let me into the program. And the pre-med admissions committee actually ended up giving me the highest letter of recommendation they could. And so it was quite extraordinary. And in fact, I did not graduate from UC Irvine at the time because I didn't have enough credits. Yet Tulane accepted me without a degree and with a 2.53 grade point average. Now, just to tell you the rest of that story, which is not in the book. So Hurricane Katrina occurred, and I had been a very successful entrepreneur. Hurricane Katrina occurred. The dean of the medical school went into depression and resigned. And Tulane was trying to recruit a new dean, and it was a fellow from Harvard, but he wanted an endowed chair, which did not exist. And an endowed chair means that somebody made a significant donation to name a chair after themselves, which provided some sort of supplemental income to the chairholder. So what happened was I ended up endowing that chair. And so the dean of the medical school today remains the Doty professor. I rebuilt the library. I set up multiple scholarships and ended up also, independent of that, setting up charities that provide health care and created blood banks all over the world, developed programs for the disabled and veterans, and for adolescents with AIDS, HIV. And so the point of the story is no one has the right to determine the capabilities of another human being. And this is a failing of so many of us. None of us can look at another and say, oh, I know what you're capable of. And this is the problem for so many people, because they forget that words have power. And, if somebody tells you, who you respect, that you'll never amount to anything, this is the worst thing somebody can do to another. I had a woman, I was giving a talk to a group of nurses one time, and we're talking about some of these topics. And she raised her hand and she started crying. And here's a woman in her 50s. She has a PhD. She's an administrator, very accomplished. And she said, my father told me that I would amount to nothing. So this woman's whole life has been spent trying to say, I am something, because of what her father said to her. But imagine the difference if instead of creating this pain that lived with this person every day in terms of trying to accomplish something to please her father, he had said, you're brilliant. You can do anything. I love you. I have confidence in you. Imagine how her life would have been different. And again, this is just to emphasize how words have power. As an example, when this woman said, it's a waste of time, implying that I'm a waste of time. Now, fortunately, I had learned enough and had enough confidence in myself that I didn't listen to any of it. And in fact, frankly, I don't listen to anyone. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Obviously, we all listen to someone. But my point is, how many of us have had a brilliant idea or are excited about some idea we came up with, and then we share it oftentimes with a loved one or somebody close to us or a relative, and they say, oh, that's a waste of time. Nothing can be more horrible than that. Instead of saying, I believe in you. If anybody can do it, you can do it. It's this type of positive affirmation that gives you self-agency, instead of people, unfortunately, being told they can't do something, and that gets embedded into their subconscious. And again, as we talked about earlier at the start, that becomes the reality.
Yeah. This reminds me of a book I'm reading. It's by Debbie Ford. It's called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And when somebody tells us as an impressionable child, or an adult, frankly, but especially as an impressionable child, that we're awkward or ugly or stupid or willful or whatever the label is, we carry that into our adulthood, and it really messes us up, as you alluded to. But if we take on board the gifts of this situation, experience, the label of it and everything, and recognize that we're everything. We are selfish and stupid and ugly, and we're also beautiful and brilliant and super smart and thoughtful and all these things. We're everything, because we're like a hologram, or like a fractal. It's the entire ocean in a single drop. And anything that we disown or we disassociate from keeps rearing its ugly head over and over again into our lives, until we take that for what it is, which is a mirror, an invitation to look at ourselves and to integrate everything that we have disowned and distance ourselves from, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, and because we're everything. And this has just been a profound experience to do that shadow work, those exercises through that book. Are you familiar with this book or the process of doing shadow work?
No, but obviously I'm familiar with Jungian psychology and the shadow self. And the challenge for people is, and I think it's a slightly different from what I was talking about in the sense that, yes, we have this components within ourselves that we're ashamed of, that we're embarrassed by, that we would prefer people don't know about, and we hide it. And what happens for most people, unfortunately, they try to push it away and act like it's not part of them. And the challenge with that is that when you're in a situation where you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you haven't had sleep, when you're weak, you're overwhelmed, unfortunately, the shadow self will come out. And what ultimately has to happen is what you alluded to, which is you have to accept your shadow self. It's not that you sit there and promote every aspect of it, but you accept it for what it is, and you integrate it into yourself, and you stop resisting it. Resistance, of course, causes suffering, just as attachment does, and just as craving does. And so, by acceptance, it actually, in this instance, is the best path to move forward.
Oh, there's so much more we could go into, and I know we're out of time. So, one other thing that I wanted to just mention that reminded me of you is I recently saw the movie Stutz. Do you know that movie? It's on Netflix. It's about Phil Stutz.
Uh, this is Yes, and who is it? I always get the two confused: Seth Rogen and
It's not Seth Rogen. It's Jonah Hill.
yeah. So I always get those two completely confused. Yes, I can. I don't know why I get them confused, but I always do. But yes,
Have you seen the movie?
I have
Okay.
not seen the
Oh,
movie,
you
but
got to
I'm
see it.
no, I
You
haven't, but
got
I'm
to see
familiar
it.
with
You'll
it.
really enjoy it. I think there
Yeah.
should be a documentary about you like that.
Well, that's kind of you. It's funny you say that because there isn't actually a woman who's doing a documentary. Her name is Karen Gornick. So it's a weird thing to sort of be in the middle of a documentary about yourself. And again, we're talking about our shadow selves. You don't want people to know about mistakes you've made or your imperfections, but they're there, and you just have to accept that. Uh, just as another side note, my book, Into the Magic Shop, actually was optioned by John Hamm, the actor, to turn into a movie.
Oh, I hope that happens. Amazing.
Yeah, we'll see. So does my wife. But she wants to play my wife while he plays me.
Oh, that's funny. All right. Well, good luck with that. That's amazing. And if our listener or viewer wants to not just pick up your books, but also, I don't know, just follow you, learn from you, and your mission help support you with all the philanthropic endeavors that you're on, going, getting going here. Where should we send them to?
Well, certainly one place is the center I run at Stanford, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. And you can find that at ccare.stanford.edu. I have a website called jamesrdotymd.com. There's also a podcast called intothemagicshop.com, which has some interesting guests there. And you can find me also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and at Instagram, and I think at Twitter, it's at James R. Doty, MD. So I'm around. And if anybody has an issue, a problem, a question, I'll do my best to answer you. And you can send me an email at jrdoty, D-O-T-Y, at stanford.edu.
Awesome. Thank you. And you're just a gift to humanity. So keep doing what you're doing. You're loved and appreciated by many.
Well, thank you, Stephan. I would also just like to say at the end of this, our power is when we are of service to others. And so many people will often say, well, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources. But the fact of the matter is, every one of us every day has the ability to improve the life of at least one person, and it costs nothing. And sometimes it's just a smile. So don't forget the power that you have to change someone's life, because when you do that, it actually changes your life. So thank you again, and I appreciate being with you.
Thank you. And thank you, listener. We'll catch you on the next episode. In the meantime, have a stupendous, amazing, fabulous week. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.